Thank you very much for the very nice and very detailed presentation. And I am very sorry that I cannot be there with you because it's a very nice place. Actually, I've been there a few times during Spotkanie Warszawskie Teatralne years ago. And I saw some very good performances there, where you are now, from Marta Górnicka, Gór Kobiet. So it's a very nice place full of memories for me, but unfortunately I couldn't go this time to Warsaw to join you. Okay, and right now to my presentation. I think it's a quite telling title because when I was asked by Jadwiga and the organizers to speak about the present situation in Hungarian theater and drama, actually I didn't have to think a lot about the subject, because right now, as my presentation's title say, I really have the feeling that we are in the 24th hour, so in the last minutes, last days of the independent performing arts in Hungary. And as far as I know, tomorrow a colleague of mine, Orsolya Bálint, will speak about the Hungarian contemporary dance field. So somehow in the next 20-25 minutes, we'll see, I will try to give you an overview of what is happening today in independent performing arts scene in Hungary. We can jump this slide because Jadwiga was so kind to present me. Here you can see all the titles and everything I do nowadays. So I jump to another handsome guy. Some of you might know him. He's Béla Pintér. I think he's the maybe the most well-known, or among the most well-known Hungarian independent theater makers. And here is a very famous quotation from him, almost from a decade ago, saying that the previous government gave money to theater makers. This one gives them a theme or a subject, a topic. Béla Pintér said these words in 2014, so almost 10 years ago. It was the 4th year of the right-wing government, right-wing governing in Hungary. And well, I remember this sentence because it was a quite famous sentence in Hungarian theaters, and I still feel that he was absolutely right. At that time, maybe it seemed like an angry outburst or an angry cry, but today this sentence became an everyday reality. By the end of this season, the 2023-24 season, a significant part of the independent theater and contemporary dance scene will disappear in Hungary. And this is not an alarm or not a threat. This is a fact, because our minister, who is responsible for culture and cultural policy, repeatedly said in the last months that he does not understand why so many independent theater companies are needed for Hungary. For example, in February this year, the minister gave an interview on the government's culture portal about his plans and ideas, and he said that he wants to bring back private funding back into the system, which, according to him, was made impossible by the Bolsheviks. Just remember the term. And otherwise, of course, it's a welcome intention. But together with other government statements and in the light of some budget decisions, this sentence can be read as an open declaration on war, this time on the independent performing arts scene. According to the minister, the future of independence and the future of the whole theatrical scene in Hungary is exclusively project funding. Even from the next year, from 2024, there will be a few companies, a few independent companies that will be subsidized by the Ministry of Culture, and nobody knows what will happen to all the others. Those of you who know some details about the Hungarian theatrical funding system, so those of you who have some knowledge on it already know maybe that it's an extremely complicated and a very so it's a very hard to understand this system, even for those who are involved, who are part of this system. But I give you some outlines, one very short outlines for the whole thing. So for the culture funding or theater funding is Hungary. Okay, the most important thing is that culture in Eastern Europe or Central Eastern Europe cannot function without state subsidy. It is the situation in Hungary, and I think it is the situation in most of or all of our countries. In Hungary, the registered independent theater and dance organizations can apply to the ministry for annual operating grants. These annual operating grants are mainly made for the infrastructure, so for the background, for the context. So this money does not go to prepare new premieres, but to maintain an office, to pay the accountant, and so on and so on. Independents can still apply to the so-called National Cultural Fund, which was funded 30 years ago, and dealing only with project funding. So you can, if you are lucky, you can win some ridiculously small amounts of money to prepare a new premiere, but of course, usually it's not enough for anything. And there are some other grants and some other applications you can apply. But the whole system is, first of all, very complicated, and somehow the independents have to prove year by year that they have the right to get some state money. Still, we are at the beginning, and I think that it makes sense to somehow identify or explain what the term independent means. I think it's a quite misleading term in Hungary because these field of performing arts, as we will see, stand mostly at the mercy of the cultural governance and the state funding. So we cannot speak about independency, but we must speak about total defenselessness and extreme dependency in the case of the so-called independence. The language itself, I think it's very telling, because the history of this so-called independent scene is accompanied by uncertainty regarding the term. For a very long time, those groups that were working outside the fixed frames of the Hungarian theatrical structure were called amateurs, which means non-professionals. And even today in Hungarian language, the term amateur, it has a sort of a pejorative side meaning or something. From the 70s, from the 1970s, a new term was raised, and they started to call the independents alternatives, and it became fashionable, this term. And on this slide, you can see some other terms. This other theater, written in two words or written in one word, it's very difficult to share the difference or to translate the difference between the two words. But if you take a look at this quotation at the bottom of the slide, I think it's the essence of the whole thing. It was written in the 90s by a Hungarian director and theater critic that time, László Bérces, and he says that whatever name we apply to other theater, marginal, radical, alternative, avant-garde, oppositional, and so on, it will always mean a theater standing or finding itself in opposition to the prevailing authority, no matter if that theater is in the institution or outside of it. And I think that's very important, this description. I said earlier that the language is telling, that the language is telling in the Hungarian theater act, where the basics of the theater funding is fixed. You can find today 3 different categories. So all the institutions, all the groups are divided into 3 categories. These categories are the so-called national institutions, the high priority institutions, and the third category is the funniest. They are the other, the so-called other. And of course, this other category, it means the independents. And what does it mean to all of us or all of you that independence cannot be and will not be ever a national institution or a high priority institution? They will always stay on this lower level of existing. They will always stay the others. And the closing thing about this introductory part is the relationship between the center and the periphery. What do I mean? Somehow, and I think this quotation from Bérces, it also shows that somehow these groups, these independent groups, always start their work on the periphery. Actually, we can name only one creator today, one theater maker in Hungary, who in the last 25 years moved from the very periphery to the absolute center of Hungarian theatrical life, and it's Béla Pintér, so the one I quoted from, because you know, he has a stable audience, he has a wide repertory, he has a permanent company, he has his own place. Okay, a footnote is needed because it's not his own place, but he rents a place. Some of you who visited Budapest in the previous years might remember that there is a small receptive venue called Szkénél Theater. It's in the Technical University in Budapest, on the 2nd floor of the Technical University. And that was the basic, or that was the headquarters of Béla Pintér. But a few years ago, he decided to move from this small receptive venue to a huge hall. So in the Szkénél Theater, they had like 120 seats, and at his new venue, they have almost 500 seats. And every night, or almost every night, they play, and almost every night they have a full house. I think this shows clearly that that he's absolutely in the center of today's theatrical life. Okay. But I told you before that these are the last days of independent performing arts and artists in Hungary. Let me quote from Réka Szabó, who is a dancer, choreographer, and director. Maybe Orsi tomorrow will mention her and her work as well. Her group, The Symptoms, in Hungarian Tünet Együttes, was founded like 20 years ago. And early this year, Réka Szabó announced that The Symptoms is closing down. I think it was the first group in today's Hungarian scene who said that they will not fight, they will not apply anymore for these ridiculous project monies or for the annual operating grants. Réka, who is the leader of Tünet Együttes, or the Symptoms, simply gave up the fight. And she published an open letter, and there is a quotation from this open letter where she announced the end of her company. She says, "I do not want to be a leader, an employer in a situation where it is impossible to take responsibility. I do not want to lose my self-respect forever, and thus became unable to respect others." And I think it was a warning sign. It was the first moment when a Hungarian independent group decided to announce publicly that we are in trouble. And it was a warning sign, and I was quite sure that it is only the first in a line, and it turned out during the last few months, that some other independent groups, one after the other, announced the end of their work, their performances. Here are just to name a few. Most of them will not be known for you, but I think the phenomenon is important, and maybe it helps even for you to understand why this whole thing is important. There was the FAQ theater. Here on the photo, you can see their graveyard, because actually they made a burial, a public burial, after their last performance this summer. And there is a symbolic graveyard, so anyone can go there and leave them a flower or something. I was there, and it was a very touching moment, of course. FAQ theater is not very well known outside Hungary. It was a group of young people. They were dealing with or experimenting with new dramaturgy, some new forms, and they've been existing for like 10 years. After 10 years, they had to finish. Narrativa Collectiva, it was founded a few years ago, and even the form was very interesting, because 4 quite successful young theater directors came together, and they decided to work together, which is not typical in Hungary, and maybe not typical in other countries as well. 4 people, 2 female and 2 male directors, with own aesthetics, own thoughts and ideas on theater, and they tried to do together something. And just a few weeks ago, they announced that they will stop working. The same can be said about Ziggurat project. They were dealing mostly with dance projects and art in public spaces, with technology and virtual reality, stuff like this. It was a small but quite interesting group. Some of you, I'm pretty sure, know Proton Theater. It's the theater of Kornél Mundruczó. Kornél Mundruczó, who is one of the most well-known faces of Hungarian contemporary theater. And a few months ago on Facebook, they announced that they start the Olympics of Survival. I think many of you know that this year we in Hungary had an Olympic year, because the National Theatre made it possible to have the 10th Theatre Olympics in Hungary, which meant that really huge amount of money went to the Theatre Olympics. and actually not a single Hungarian forint went to the small independent companies, to any of those grassroots initiatives, and so on and so on. So, you know, there was a very spectacular surface or a facade, but for the small ones, there was absolutely nothing. And the last group I want to mention, actually, it's a complete genre, the genre of the theater in education. It has a very long tradition in Hungary and a very fruitful tradition, because almost 30 years ago, so after the change of the regime, they started to work with theater in education and drama pedagogy and so on and so on. And, you know, somehow for the right-wing government, these groups are dangerous. These groups are dangerous because, you know, they promote, in a way, critical thinking. They develop a culture of debate, how to debate with each other. They address young people. They deal with inclusive forms. They are thinking together with their audiences about the basic questions of democracy. And these theater in education groups and their most important groups are Káva and Kerekasztal, which is roundtable in English. They are on the verge of disappearance now. And I know that I've been complaining for almost 20 minutes. So somehow and in my abstract, I promised that I will talk more about, or I will talk about the way out and the possibilities of leaving this miserable state behind. And I think what is going to happen actually this week, at the end of this week in Budapest, the Dunapart, the platform of Hungarian performing arts, I think it is a sort of a way out. But before I speak about Dunapart, just to reflect on what I was speaking about, I think so. It's a prediction, and maybe I won't be right, or I hope maybe I'm not right. But my prediction is that the low budget or no budget productions with a very small cast that are easily so those productions that travel easily, these will be created in the coming months or the coming years. And those productions can work that are already made for an international distribution, or together made with international producers or co-producers. And maybe some of them are so-called licenses. So there is a form, or there is a thinking that can be transferred easily to another country, to another context. We know a few of these shows already. And in the last part of my presentation, I try to speak, or I will speak about Dunapart. Some of you, I'm pretty sure, already know Dunapart. Some of you have been there before. But I strongly believe that that this year's program is quite special in many ways, partly because of this very special context I try to introduce you to. Okay, so what is Dunapart? It's a platform of contemporary Hungarian performing arts. It's a showcase aimed at theater professionals coming from abroad. And Dunapart has many different goals. Okay, a few different goals. First of all, we try to represent the present state of Hungarian independent performing arts. Dunapart encourages networking, which means that new partnerships and old ones are very in the very heart of the event. We try to provide a context for the international guests, and the main idea is to promote Hungarian performing arts abroad. These are the numbers. I made a sort of a statistics, and I was already surprised that during these 7 editions, I count in this week's edition as well, during 7 editions, we had more like 170 performances. Usually these performances are verbal and non-verbal theater, so we do not like the terms theater program and dance program, but usually at the end it turns out that that there are 2 main paths in Dunapart you can follow. This week's Dunapart we will have like 22 performances during 3 days. Of course there will be some overlapping, but our guests can follow one route, the theater route or the dance route, and sometimes they are mixed. What is very important about Dunapart's program is that it's a curated, it's a selected program. So there is no space for politics and ideology and stuff like this. For example, this year, 6 curators selected from almost 200 applications. I think it's an extra high number of applications because this year's Dunapart edition is dealing with the performances of the last 4 years. You know, because of the COVID, we had to skip 1 edition. That's why I think that's why we had so many things. A few general observations on Dunapart, and I think I have like 3 more minutes if I am right. But I think it gives you some sort of impressions what is happening today in independent performing arts. I think it's quite sad that the focus of Dunapart is almost exclusively on Budapest. So there is no money and no logistics for inviting productions from the countryside. The other thing is that cultural mobility doesn't exist in Hungary. So those of you who were already in Budapest, you might know that usually we cannot choose any exciting independent shows from the countryside, as there are no groups there, no independent groups there, and somehow the cultural government, and it's not a right-wing thing because it's happening in the last 3 decades at least, is not dealing with cultural mobility, which is, I think it has and it will have some tragic consequences. It's also typical that the Hungarian theaters outside Hungary are underrepresented. Of course, there are a few exceptions. You can see the names on the slide. And it's also a question that stone theaters are also present in the selection. And now I would go back to the definition I showed you before, the definition of László Bérces, who said that independent thinking is always in opposition to the cultural governance. So it doesn't count if the show, if a certain show was made in an institution, in a stone theater with the repertory and the constant ensemble, or in a small independent group. I try to say something positive. I think it's great, and I'm very proud of it as a co-curator of the Dunapart for almost 10 years, that more than 1/3 of the creators who participated or participate in Dunapart's main program are female theater makers. It's not typical in Hungary, so it's a very male-dominated. We have a very male-dominated theater life. Somehow, Dunapart shows, of course, mostly because of the contemporary dance scene, and I think Orsolya will speak about it tomorrow in details. Mostly because of the contemporary dance scene, that we have great female directors and choreographers and playwrights and so on and so on, and somehow we can show it to people abroad. It's also typical that only a few foreign theater makers working with Hungarian groups. I'm pretty sure you know the name of Janina Carbonariu, who from time to time works with Hungarian-speaking groups, and there are some other people there. Okay, and the last thing on this slide is that it's also a new phenomenon, I think, in the last 10 years of Hungarian independent performing arts, that you know, those big companies like Kréta Körtheater, you know them, or the work of Árpád Schilling, of course, or the Sputnik shipping company made by Viktor Bodó, and some other companies, they disappeared. They finished their working, and now the Hungarian independents are mostly small project-based shows. So 3 people, 5 people, 7 people get together, and with a very low budget or almost no budget, they create something. And I'm afraid I already ran out of time. So I will stop here. But if you have any questions, please let me know, because I had some other slides as well. But as a sort of an introduction to the present situation in independent performing arts in Hungary, that's all for now. Thank you for attention, and I'm sorry that I cannot be here with you. Thank you very much.